In this video, we're going to talk about textures in Blender. So we talked in the previous video about materials and how to set up the basic parameters. We saw what are the basic channels of materials, and also we learned that material is essentially reacting to light. So every effect that we get from material is something like a reaction to the light that it's hitting the object where we apply that material. So it depends how the surface reacts to the light, and also how the subsurface, so the central part, the core part of the object, is gonna behave in response to a beam of light. So we're gonna go back to some of those topics, but this time we're gonna also apply the texture. So it's gonna be something more complex, and this is also called PBR, which means physically based render effect, or physically based render materials or textures. So we talked about the diffuse, and we said that the diffuse channel is basically the most superficial layer of your material, and the diffuse effect is actually when the light is going to be scattered all around the surface, so you're gonna get this diffuse effect, which in terms of the real life, the diffuse channel, or in this case diffuse textures, is basically the most superficial texture. And then we can apply also texture to the metallic layer or metallic effect, and also we can apply texture to the roughness and to the glossiness and specular and so on. So essentially we can apply a texture to any channel. So while in the previous video we only worked with one single value, which was like the color value, or the one single parameter, which was from black to white, when we use textures, we use a variety of pixels, which can go from, well, colored pixels in case of diffuse, or in other software it's called albedo, or also the color layer. But also we can see that if you use a roughness textures instead of a single color, which goes from black to white, we're gonna have different response, which is not uniform. It's gonna behave in terms of what pixels it's gonna see. Now, don't worry about all this. If it's too complex, we're gonna see it in action shortly. Now, I also want to suggest you other software that are specific to create textures and mapping and painting. And the first one is Substance Painter from Adobe. The second one is gonna be Marmoset Toolbag, and also Armor Paint. Armor Paint, it's totally open source, by the way, so you can download it and install it for free. But all of these are really cheap to use. If you want to create really realistic and advanced materials, you can use those. So we're gonna start by searching textures. First of all, let's jump into the scene here. This is a scene that I have developed in another lesson, so we're gonna start from here. So I'm gonna select this pavement here, this floor, and you can see I've already assigned a material to this floor, which I'm going to get rid of right now. So I'm gonna select the object, I'm gonna go into the material tab, select the material and press minus. This is gonna get rid of that material. So this is what happens when you create a new object, or when you have an object without any material applied. So I can apply a new one from here, material tab on the right side. So I'm gonna click on new, and this is immediately gonna create a material for us. And then we have the base color and all the other channels. Again, when we work with these parameters, we are essentially going from 0 to 100%, or from 0 to 1, which also means from black to white. So black means no effect, white means 100% the effect. So I can apply here a base color, really easy, we already saw how to do that. And also remember to be in material preview shader mode here, so that we can actually see what we are doing. And if you remember, in another lesson we created this green screen effect using a standard color as a background, but keeping the HDRI lighting and reflections. So we already started to see the difference between a simple color, for example as a background, and using an environment texture. So the texture always gonna help you to make things more realistic. And we see here an example. Let me show you right away. So this is using the actual HDRI. So also in the materials, if we apply textures, they're gonna boost our realism and physically accuracy of our material. So to do that, from here, we can simply click on this yellow dot next to the base color, and this is gonna let you apply textures. So what you see here is a bunch of textures and other stuff like colors and other nodes, but essentially what we will need will be this one here, image texture. But before we get into that, I just want to show you some procedural maps. Now, these are also called maps, which means something that you are mapping onto your object. So if we use the checker texture, we can see that it's gonna apply a checker, but this is not an actual image. Well, this is what it's called a procedural map, which means it's procedural. You can modify it while being here in Blender. When you use a simple image like this bricks texture here, to modify that, you can do something here in Blender, but if you want to modify that radically, you need to go to Photoshop or GIMP or other image editing software. So another important thing that we already saw is that we need to work in the shading panel. The shading panel, or well, you can transform any view here if you want in the shader editor. Well, this is important because once you apply the material, then you need to manage it, and you need to also manage the mapping to make it work good. So the checker, it's simpler, but then we're gonna see that textures are gonna be a little bit more complex. So when you apply these checker textures, this is what happens here in the nodes editor. So it's gonna apply here a new node, and this is gonna go into the base color. And these values here are also available here. So you can see that now we have two colors. We have a first color and a second color. And procedural maps means that I can continuously change this many times without losing any, well, it's not destructive. I will not use the possibility to go back and forward and change this many times. And also I have the scale, which is really important as well. And this is, let's say, the first way we can map our material onto the object. So sometimes when you use procedural maps, you will also have scale, and you can also translate this into another important term, which is tiling. So when we use a texture, it should be tileable. If it's not tileable, you cannot repeat it more than one time. So it's just like a single repetition texture. But most of the cases, you will have tileable and repeatable textures. So you're gonna repeat them many times, and you're gonna cover large areas, large surfaces with just a single texture. So you can think about the texture here. If you say 1, so this is gonna be like a single repetition. Then if you say 2, this is gonna be now one single checker. And if you, let's say 10, you're gonna repeat this 10 times. So actually you're not scaling, you're tiling this texture many times. So the more you increase this value, the more tiles you will have, and they're gonna be smaller. If you go the other way, you can see that, well, it's gonna do the same thing, but if you say 0.1, that's gonna make it way more bigger. So it's gonna make it 10 times bigger. Okay, let's keep this to 4. So you can modify it from here, you can modify it from here. Now let's go into the wall here. So if I select this wall, you can see I've already applied here some PBR texture, but let me just disconnect those. So I'm going to move this and just click and unlink these textures. And of course, this is what is gonna happen. So it's gonna show you again the basic material, which is gonna be like this white material. And you can see I've also applied 2 different materials here, and this is possible thanks to the polygon selection. So I'm gonna show you also that in just a minute. But let's apply here some brick textures, and this time again it's gonna be a procedural map. So if I click here, you can see I have brick texture. Okay. Now the brick texture is going to create procedural bricks. And again, I can change each of these colors from here. And you can see now it's looking pretty strange. And I also have the scale, mortar size, and other parameters. So procedural maps are pretty handy because we have a lot of parameters here we can modify, and we can see real time the effect. Now I applied these textures also to other objects in my scene, and you can see that it behaves differently in every surface. So maybe here is starting to look a little bit better, perhaps here. So this is the way it should look. Now, why does it look this strange? Well, this is because these objects here have not been mapped. They don't have a correct mapping. And usually this happens when you do polygonal modeling and you start to extrude, and the moment you extrude, you're gonna like stretch the pixels that they're gonna be on that image. So if I add, for example, here a new cube and just move it right here and apply the same material. So we saw another node which is available by clicking Shift Q, and this is gonna create this new menu. And this is called Material Utilities, and it's an add-on which we activated in the previous video. So from here I can assign a ready-made material, which is going to be again our wall material. Okay, you can see that here it's projected in the correct way, but if I move